Change is scary for everybody. You have to think about the change that you're willing to introduce. What is the process implication that it will have? What are the changes that people will need to make to be able to absorb this change? What are your biggest pain points? What are the things that are on your mind? What are the things that you need to deliver? When you take the time to put yourself in their shoes, one, you can empathize with how they might be looking at what you're presenting forward. But two, what you can also do is reframe the conversation and say, here's where what I'm doing will actually help you get to your goal. If you don't build for the future, then what are you doing? You're not really putting yourself in a position to win.
Welcome to the B2B Experience, brought to you by Big Light, one of Europe's leading experience design agencies. In this podcast series, we speak to digital pioneers in B2B and tell real stories of breaking down barriers and delivering change. I'm Steve Borges, and my guest today is MQ Qureshi, who, as a young man, moved from his native Kenya to Kentucky to pursue his dream career in architecture before pivoting to digital. He spent his entire career delivering digital transformation, from his early days at General Motors to his role at Ford Motors today, but with an incredible amount of variety in between, taking in McDonald's, dental implants, startups, and of course, B2B. When I met him, I was intrigued about the lessons he's learned from delivering change across this eclectic journey. And I'm looking forward to exploring these with him. Welcome, MQ.
Steve, it's a pleasure to be here, and I've been looking forward to chatting for quite a while since we met in Chicago not too long ago. Excited to be here.
Excellent, very good. Well, I think you'll agree we have to start with that epic journey from Kenya to Kentucky and from architecture to digital. How did that
Yeah.
come about?
My father, he would tell this story to everybody that he bought an Olivetti computer back in 1984 or something like that. It was a green screen CGA, computer with floppy disk drives and all of that. But that kind of got us, started. My brother got interested, in it. He taught himself some basic programming, taught it to me, and we would spend, all our time, on here. And that kind of love of everything digital started at a very young age. And so, when it comes to, studying things, there was always, I was always a couple of steps ahead than whatever was being taught in class because I had more practical experience. And so this is, something that I think comes down to it is that, you can have a lot of book knowledge, which is great, but you always have to approach everything with keen observation and always be in a learning mode to be able to absorb new information and really build from that. There's no substitute for learned experience. So that, coupled with that background that I had when I was at the University of Kentucky, and I got a job in the computer lab, and and I taught myself some basic HTML. I had always loved design, which is why I was pursuing the degree in architecture. And I found that this started, kind of fusing two loves that I had, and then I started building websites for people.
So your father's choices were vindicated in the end, and effectively.
For sure. Yeah, he said that he would often say that, yeah, I had the vision to buy that computer. That's what led to your career. And I said, you know what, Dad, you're absolutely right. You were absolutely right. You saw the future. And the funny thing was that, at that time, not a lot of people had home computers, and it was quite an expense, to get one. And and it really was very prescient of him. He was always a man, he was very inspirational to me. He was always a man that was in constant learning mode. He had a string of letters after his name because even into his old age and into his retirement age, he would pursue learning about new things, anything that interested him he'd get right into it. And that kind of lifelong curiosity is something that, I'm very grateful to him for being the inspiration for. And then hopefully, that's something that I'll be able to pass on to my children.
You worked across many industries, but you spent one of the longest periods in B2B. So what is it about B2B digital that grabbed your interest initially and kept you enthralled?
Yeah, B2B is one of the most interesting, you know, environments out there. So I'll tell you my journey of how I came to B2B. I was working for a consulting firm called Rosetta that was purchased by Publicis and then merged with Razorfish. And I had been doing all kinds of different projects, for them, US Mint, Office Max, others. And my kind of flagship project was doing Puma's global digital strategy. This is in around circa 2010, and so, r- quick 5-second tangent is that they were global brand like Puma were doing less than 4% of their business online, didn't know why, hired us. I led in that audit and created that 3-year roadmap for them to implement. So really cool stuff that I was working on. But my daughter had just been born. I was on the road week in, week out. My wife was pregnant with our second. And, at that time in consulting, you had to be at the client site Monday through Thursday or Friday. And so I needed to have that change. So it wasn't for it is, what wasn't for anything else that led to that idea of looking around. And so Granger at that point had hired within the last, 4 to 6 months, a leader that used to run the e-com business at Williams Sonoma as well as Sears, a really phenomenal gentleman by the name of Paul Miller. And they had hired him to come in and do this massive transformation at Granger. And so I came in with that wave of people because there were some folks I'd worked with at Sears who were now there and brought me in. And so when I came into Granger, I was like, I'm like this cool guy that, did this massive project for Puma, and I've got all these bag of tricks, in my bag here, and I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna show these stodgy old B2B people how things are done. And boy, was I in for some schooling because when I got in, I was like, holy moly, like direct to consumer and B2C is about here, in terms of depth. It's very straightforward. It's very, B2B is like this. It's there are many, many, many layers, many different things to look out for. There's tremendous complexity. There's tremendously sophisticated customers across many different spectrums. There are multiple complexities in terms of everything from fulfillment to search to product development to SKU management to inventory management, et cetera, and everything in between. And so I learned rapidly that, oh boy, you better take off your mantle of sophistication and start getting into pure learning mode because there's a lot here. And that was actually really intriguing and fascinating.
Can you tell me a story of a situation when you realized that or encountered that?
Well, at that time, not a lot of people knew a lot about their customers, and we were kind of one of the first agencies that were coming in and saying, "Hey, we have some proprietary approaches and techniques and tech that'll actually mine this for you and put it in a way in which you can really understand it and break down your customers and figure out, not only where they are in your journey, but also what share of wallet they represent, et cetera, et cetera." So we'd go into multiple, engagements like this, and everybody be fascinated and they'd love this aspect of us. So I was used to kind of, bring that wow factor into the room. With Puma as an example, they, very sophisticated company in terms of personas, and they had several, but there was no data behind them. And so one of the things that were there was that this was their idea of who their customers were, but it actually didn't reflect the reality of who they actually were. So this was something that had come fresh off of, and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna bring this approach. This is gonna be my thing. I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna bring that in." I got to Granger, and I was and they were like, "Oh yeah, we already do that." I was like, "Wait, what?" And so one of the things was that Granger was very, very sophisticated even at that time in terms of saying, "Hey, here are two primary personas that we have. One is of the procurement manager, procurement director, Betty, and this is the person that basically at the companies to whom we sell to is sitting and making the decisions about which products to order and how to manage the inventory. And then there's Al, who is on the shop floor or the facility itself who's actually leveraging and using the products. And it's a balance between these two. Here's what Betty does, and very sophisticated, very detailed, very data driven about what Betty does, how a character like Betty interacts with everyone from Granger, from salespeople to everyone else, and and an equally sophisticated persona for Al. So there was one where I was like, okay, you know what? Not only are these guys already doing something that I thought would be kind of new to them, but also doing it at a very mature and sophisticated level.
So thinking across your experience, sometimes one of the hardest things to do is to convince an organization that it's time to act, it's time to invest in
Mhm.
digital or transformation. What effective ways have you seen of convincing organizations of the need to act? And can you think of a specific example that might be relevant to a B2B audience?
So I don't think anybody will argue with you when you say that, hey, we need to act, right? We need to do something, right? The question always comes down to is how and where and why. Convince me of where and why and how, right? And so when it comes to, and AI is a good example of that, right? Everybody wants it, right? How do we go about it? The second thing is that when you look at, an organization and you look at what are the things that they are optimizing for, what are the things that they're spending their time on and their energies on, and what you are proposing, how close is it to that core of who that company is? And so the thing is that change is scary for everybody. There's an implication of disruption, there's an implication of fear, there's an implication of redundancy in terms of processes and people, et cetera, that need to be confronted. And so you're going to find resistance across, all those different areas. But perhaps I think, one of the biggest things is that we've also seen in the last couple of years where the CFO has become a much bigger manager and arbiter of that change compared to, what they used to be. Everybody is trying to manage cost with more focus than ever before. So you have to come to the table being very mindful of all of those things. You have to think about the change that you're willing to introduce. What is the process implication that it will have? What are the changes that people will need to make to be able to absorb this change? And so you have to spend a little bit of time thinking about the absorption of change and how you'll move through that and have an answer for that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that you have to think about it and you have to be ready for it. The second thing is that you have to think about from that CFO standpoint, an investment is going to be required. Does this investment justify the output and over what period? So if you're coming to the table and you're saying we're going to do this massive 3 to 5 year transformation, it's going to cost X, and then it's going to deliver Y. Well, when is Y going to deliver? 3 years after that change is implemented. So now you're saying that the investment that you're asking me for now is going to give its return, start giving a return in 6 years, right? Because generally what we find is that there is a 2 to 3 year implementation period for large transformations, and then a cooling period, and then a part where that change really pays off. So on that front, when you're coming in and you're putting this together, you are not, the decision you're asking the CFO or the senior management team to make is that 6 year window that you're looking for. We still need to generate money. We still need to generate a profit. We still need to generate, value to our customers and to our shareholders, if you're a public company. So how are we going to do that with this massive investment that we're taking on? So either you're putting together a business case that's just so amazing and it's going to overcome all of that, or you need to think about, okay, how am I going to chunk this up?
What are the biggest barriers to delivering change that you've come across? And in particular, have you ever come across a level of resistance that surprised you?
It's amazing how much, yeah, there is resistance to change. I actually had one leader say to me, we're not going to have what you're visioning here for a couple of years, right? You know, so we need to focus on what we're doing today, and that's where it is. Now, I'm not saying you take your eyes off the ball in terms of what you need to deliver today. That's what business says you deliver on a day-to-day basis. However, if you don't build for the future, then what are you doing? You're not really, putting yourself in a position to win. Really, it's where I had to step back and ask myself, why is this resistance happening? You know, in cases where it's benign, right, where there's a genuine concern over what it is that you're trying to do, and we're all trying to win, I think there's a conversation to be had, because then you can say, well, look, here's where here's where we can approach this. But that requires you to sit down and ask the person what it is that they're concerned about, and genuinely listen to their feedback in an impersonal way, and understand what are the things that they're focused on. So instead of just saying, hey, point out all the things that are wrong with what I'm trying to do, it's more about having a conversation with the other person or group of people to say, what are your biggest pain points? What are the things that are on your mind? What are the things that you need to deliver? And so when you take the time to put yourself in their shoes, one, you can empathize with how they might be looking at what you're presenting forward. But two, what you can also do is reframe the conversation and say, here's where what I'm doing will actually help you get to your goal. And so when that conversation is again benign, and it's between individuals who are trying to achieve, the same thing in terms of growth, then I think you can always find that middle ground, and you can build forward. In some cases, I have encountered in my career where the conversation is not benign, where there's agendas at work, you know, and so you have to, recognize that. Again, not take it personally, because those agendas have nothing to do with you, and those agendas probably have a lot more to do with optics than anything else, so but you have to recognize it so that you can factor for it, and that you can say, okay, how do I work with or around this? But at the end of the day, you still have to bring people with you, and you have to think about how to turn them into allies. It's not, the third scenario is where the core of the organization is so focused on one thing and delivering on that one thing every day, that they have forgotten how to think ahead. And you need to remind them, the other part of it, which is the pain or the possibility of pain, and to say, listen, you are doing all of this stuff. All it takes is X to happen. And what you're enjoying the results of right now is no longer going to be true. So you need to get ahead of this and invest, so that you can build a buffer around what you're doing at its core, so that it's not going to be so at the whim of changes in the marketplace. And if you don't do that, if you don't plan for that, then the business is going to be hurt, because of it.
And based on your experience then of delivering successful change, how important is technology and how important is people and people's behavior?
I mean, technology is obviously very important, right? Changing technology is a reality that we all have to deal with, and not only deal with, but find ways to make our ally. And one thing is that changing technology also means being in a position where you're ready for change. So how do you get into a place where you're ready for change is your process and your people, and so technology, I think, follows people in process. You have to understand how change flows through, how it flows through an organization, how value is delivered through an organization, what are the different parts of in that chain of delivering the value to the organization, and the people and the systems that keep that together, and the process that keeps that together. Nothing exists arbitrarily. It is all there for a particular reason. So, I go to this Toyota's A3, system of evaluating change. And A3, I think, just stands for the size of the paper that you put this on. Where you divide the paper into two halves, and one half you state your problem. And what they say is that you should always write that problem statement in pencil, because the next step after you write down what the problem is, then what problem you're trying to solve is stated. Then take the next step of Toyota's five whys, which is you ask, why does this problem exist? And then when you answer that, you ask, why does that exist? And you go down five layers deep. And what you'll often find is that the statement that you put there was actually not the problem. When you go down, looking down five layers deep, then you go, okay, this is the real problem. And so you erase what you put and you update it. But once you've identified that, then you think about, okay, why does this problem exist? And then you think about, okay, how what I'm proposing going to address this problem, and then how am I going to measure its success? Technology, in my opinion, should enable all of that and help us get there faster, deliver a good outcome. So in today's world where we have more and more automated tools to do more and more things. We've talked a lot about AI and there's agentic AI and there's generative AI and there's everything in between that is calling itself AI. You have to still make sure that you understand that and everybody on the team understands the process and the outcomes and the journey, because what happens is that in this rapid answer, rapid generation environment that we're finding ourselves in, if you don't know what you want and you don't know how at least it gets put together, you can really fall into hallucination traps tremendously, because it can be giving you something that is absolutely made up. But if you don't know what it is to begin with, then you're gonna not be able to diagnose it, and then your customers are gonna pick that up in the end because it's going to show up in their experiences.
Looking back at your diverse career journey so far,
Mhm.
what's one thing you wish that you'd known earlier, and what might have changed had you known it?
The amount of organizational change that I've seen happen so rapidly across different groups and different organizations. If I'd known some of those things were as volatile, I may have made a different decision around my involvement with some of those organizations. I think that's the biggest thing, is that having when you enter into something, there's a level of trust that you're putting into into what you're doing, and into the people that you're interacting with. And so what you realize is that there's some organizations that manage that really well, and there's some organizations that are constantly in flux. And so how do you find that balance and approach things? I'd say that yeah, if I had to redo things, it would be perhaps finding ways to be more engaged with places where volatility is lower.
Fascinating conversation. I think it's very interesting that your thirst for your thirst for digital innovation was driven by understanding customer journeys and looking at issues in data. I'm sure you've come across issues with data in almost every role that you've
Mm,
been in ever since you started. I like the idea that rapid innovation outpaces good practice, and that
mm,
sometimes it's worth just slowing down and understanding what we're trying to fix by implementing technology, and that technology itself can't play a role on its own. It's an enabler, but really it's an enabler to improving processes and people. You've used the phrase change. Well, change actually has come up quite a few times. Change is scary, and there can be resistance to change. You've used the term absorbing change, which is quite nice. And finally, overcoming resistance. That resistance can come in three forms: that's benign, or resistance that's based on an agenda, or resistance that is because the business or organization is too focused on delivering the core, and there is therefore is blind to the importance of thinking ahead. I do have one final question for you, and it's called B2B buzzword bingo. So,
right.
what's one buzzword that's overused or a trend that's overhyped in B2B digital right now that you wish would disappear, and why?
Agentic AI, because it implies so much that, oh, we're going to be able, it implies so much efficiency that we're going to be able to, replace all of these things with automated agents, etc. It's not easy to deliver and deliver consistently. So before you leap into that, I wouldn't say disappear, but I would say be very cautious about, how quickly you embrace things like that.
So it's another opportunity for rapid innovation to outpace good practice, in your view.
Yeah, yeah, and especially in B2B where there's many layers, you need to be very, very, not so cautious, as B2B can be very overcautious, but you have to be very solid.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you very much, NQ. Thank you for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Steve. I really appreciate you having me and look forward to connecting with you when you visit Chicago.
Well, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, then please don't forget to hit subscribe and to share it with your network. And if you'd like to find out more about how Big Light helps its clients discover the needs of their customers and deliver experiences that meet them, then check out our website or follow us on LinkedIn. I'll see you next time.